Good morning, everyone, and welcome to An Unexpected Fight. We are so excited about our episode today. Kelly and I are joined with Susan Latta, and Kelly's going to tell us a little bit about her.
Yes. So, Susan, thank you so much for being here with us today. Susan Latta, LMFT, is a licensed marriage and family therapist and the department head of clinical services at the Austin Hatcher Foundation for Pediatric Cancer. Susan holds a fellow in, you have to help me with this one, Susan, is it thanatology?
Thanatology, yes.
Yep, which is the study of death and dying, which I recently learned. She received her BS from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo University and her MA from Fuller Theological Seminary. Susan brings 35 years of counseling to individuals, children, and families through the many challenges that occur when a child is diagnosed with cancer, with over 23 years of experience in the medical field. Susan loves to be in nature, travel, cuddle with her two miniature Dachshunds, Gertie and Maggie, and find time to return to California to see her family and walk on the beaches of the Pacific Ocean. So, again, Susan, it sounds like you have incredible experience dealing with helping these families through the most challenging time, and we're so excited to have you today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, Susan, firstly, just can you tell us a little bit about your background and kind of what led you to work with the Austin Hatcher Foundation?
Absolutely. I have worked a lot with pediatric cancer. I was at a hospice for 19 years as the director of their grief program and worked. We had a pediatric team, so I was on that. And through some circumstances, that position was eliminated. And so I knew Amy Jo and Jim, who were the ones that founded Austin Hatcher when their son died. And I reached out to Amy Jo and said, hey, any idea or thoughts of me coming on? And so I did, and I've been there almost 4 years. So it's been a great transition for me working from hospice to this, and just being with families and individuals. I work a lot with individual moms, but I also do some families and kids as well.
Awesome, Susan. So we know there's a lot of pediatric cancer foundations out there. Tiffany started her own. I work for one. Tell us a little more about Austin Hatcher Foundation. What makes them unique in the world of pediatric cancer support?
So we are based in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And Amy Jo and Jim Osborne started Austin Hatcher 19 plus years ago. I think Austin would be 19 this year. And he had a rare brain cancer and died about 4 months old. And out of their grief, they decided that they wanted to provide a space and a place for families to come. So we provide the mission is it's a lifetime of free services, and it's for not just the child that has had cancer, it's for the family, because as both of you know, it's not just the child that's impacted, but it's the whole family that is impacted. And we provide therapy, occupational therapy, industrial arts. um, we have some testing, neurocog testing that happens, some enrichment. We provide a lot of different types of camps for kids just to have fun. And we have done 2 this summer that were 4-day camps and had an average of 25, 30 kids that came and it was all, each one was themed differently. And so we have 3 therapists, 3 psychotherapists. We have 1 occupational therapist. We have a recreational therapist, and then we have a whole staff that does what we call enrichment with kids and families and planning all the different activities that they provide throughout the year. And then we have a whole team that fundraises and does all the stuff that you have to do in order to keep your organization going. So
Absolutely. I love that you have therapists on staff to help these families. I think that's extremely important. That's a resource that I'm always looking
yes,
for the family. So I'll be passing some people your way.
right.
I think it's not a resource that's commonly given either. I think that mental health, no matter the scenario, is still widely underutilized in many facets of healthcare.
Yes. We also have a contract employee that's a LCSW that's Spanish speaking, because we
Amazing.
realize that we were missing that population.
Mhm.
And it's just so hard. I've done it, but it's very difficult doing a session and using a translator on a phone. It just doesn't work. So that's been a great addition in the last year. So
I love that. How would you describe the emotional journey that a lot of these families experience after a child is diagnosed with cancer?
it is a roller coaster, as you both know, because both of you and if you have spouses or your family, your other kids, everybody does this so differently, and they're all on different timelines. You might be upset in a moment and someone else is angry, or they're happy, and you're just like, it's an absolute roller coaster. And it's so it's it's a life-changing moment, the moment that parents receive that reality: your child has blah blah cancer. I mean, and most moms, most dads can tell you exactly where they were when they heard that diagnosis, and can describe the room and smells and all the different senses, because it is like frozen in time.
Yep, absolutely. That's how I would describe it, a roller coaster.
Yeah.
And it's since we're kind of leading into that form of trauma, those smells, those things that you experience. In your work, what are some common forms of trauma that families maybe don't always recognize right away?
A lot of the trauma, I think, is realizing that they now are in this reality forever. Um, because whether your child survives or whether your child dies, it is a life changing experience. And whichever situation happens, you're going to continue on that journey for the rest of your life. So, some of the things that I often will see is this whole sense of the siblings, where they feel left out, they feel lonely, they feel like they can't, their sibling is getting all this attention. Um, they are dysregulated because whatever was happening in the house is now totally different. You might have other people coming, or you have shared responsibilities. Mom is at the hospital, dad's at the hospital, but it's not mom and dad at home, or mom and mom, or dad and dad, or whatever the family situation is. But trying to figure out, how do you, one, navigate yourself, two, self regulate your child that's sick, laying in bed, having multiple different procedures with multiple different doctors and technicians and people coming in and throwing a bunch of information at you that you don't most people are not even mindful of, let alone now they have to become experts in whatever the situation is, or whatever the diagnosis is. I work with one mom, and her daughter had a brain cancer, diagnosed at 2. And the surgeon said to her, "Do not Google this. I will tell you everything you need to know. Please do not Google it." And she still, it's now 2+ years later, and she still refers back to that and she's a nurse. And so it would have been very easy for her just to go on, MD or Google or whatever. And she said, I chose not to do that because I really wanted to get she said, her daughter is not a number.
Mhm.
She's a child, and she's a human. And so that has been such a significant thing for this mom, as she's navigated now. Her daughter does not have cancer, and trying to figure out this whole world now going forward.
That
Yeah,
can be so tough.
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And it's true, statistics are not everything. So that's really good advice. Stay off Google.
Yes,
Find yourself a Susan to talk to.
Exactly, because what Google may say may or may not be correct, but it can be harmful. And so,
Absolutely.
absolutely it can. So, we're kind of talking about a little bit about death and dying, and you've got a big background in that, working with hospice and palliative care. So, how does the anticipatory grief show up in parents or siblings, and how are some ways that parents or siblings can process that in a healthy way?
those are some great questions. And anticipatory grief is also for people that not necessarily the person dies, but like I have worked with a mom, and her son has I forget what, I think he had a Wilms tumor. And because of the treatment of the chemo, he has all sorts of other medical things. He's in a wheelchair now. He is on dialysis multiple times a week. And just trying to, I mean, that is a whole grief. This was an 11-year-old healthy boy before diagnosis. And now he's a very different child at 12, having gone through all that he went through with his cancer treatment. So anticipatory grief can also just be watching the decline of your child, not necessarily dying, but changing in how they're able to operate in the world, and realizing that, okay, this is going to be different. Another mom I'm working with, her son had a stroke. He was 2. He's now 16. He's in a wheelchair. He's nonverbal, and he is going to require 24/7 care the rest of his life. And that's not it's a result of chemo and radiation and the treatment, not necessarily the cancer that he had at 2. That is anticipatory grief. His 16th birthday was a couple weeks ago, and someone sent her a message saying, happy birthday to her son, named her son. And she came in to a session and she said, I am grieving that my child will never, ever, ever drive. He will never play on a football team or play basketball or, do whatever she had hoped he would do when he was born. And that is anticipatory grief. Then you have someone that's being given a diagnosis that this is a terminal diagnosis. And that anticipatory grief continues as the decline of the child happens. And everybody in the family is going to do it different. I worked with somebody, and they had a 6 or 7 year old child that was dying, and they had a 12-year-old child who just made jokes because that was how that child dealt with couldn't deal with the fact that his brother was having this thing called dying happen. And so he used jokes as a way to cope. And so being able to also, in a family, realizing that everyone will do this differently. And as a mom, as a dad, as an adult, trying to be non judgmental to your kids, to your spouse, to your partner, whoever that might be, and just realizing, okay, this is how they're doing it right now, and trying to just navigate that and validate and not place expectations on them.
That makes sense. Everybody grieves a little bit differently. So I guess the answer to that question is that there's a lot of different healthy ways. Everybody's way is a little bit different. And, having grace and understanding that within a family, I'm sure can be very difficult. So thank you so much for touching on that. I think that'll help a lot of our listeners who are dealing with grief right now, and realizing that, within their own families, it looks a little different for everybody.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we know that the outcome is not always a cure. And so for many families, the possibility that their child might not survive is a fear that they live with every day. How can therapists support families who are facing this really very real possibility?
With the real possibility of the death. Is that what?
Yes.
Yeah. Be there as a listening ear would be the first thing. allowing them to share stories. I think one of the most important things is saying their names, like Nora, and learning a little bit about Nora and asking to see a picture about Nora and finding ways to bring Nora into a conversation. When I was at hospice, I worked with a mom, and her, I think he was like 23, 24-year-old son, had a really rare neurological thing, and he died from it. And so it wasn't cancer, but it was coming up onto the 1 year mark of his death. And we were talking, and I said, "What do you think you want to do?" And she said, I want to invite some of his friends over and do a barbecue and have, beer and chips and barbecue and all that, hamburgers and hot dogs." And she said, "And I wanted them to share stories about him and to talk about him." And I said, "Oh, that is such a great idea." So, the day came and she had this barbecue. Her husband did not want to participate. He said that was going to be too hard. So he did his own thing. But she had, I think there were like 5 or 6 of his friends that came over. And they just laughed and shared stories about him. And she said, some of the stories I knew, but some of them I didn't know. And it was a good reason I didn't know. But for her, it was like bringing him back to life. And I just love that. And so finding creative ways of continuing to honor Nora, or I'm sorry, I don't know your child's name.
Riley. She's still with us,
Right,
fortunately. But yes,
right.
right, my daughter's right.
So I'm having a really hard time hearing you. I'm sorry.
Oh, can you hear
Yeah,
me okay now?
a little bit better. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So, anyways, finding ways to, your question initially was, how do you support a family that has had a child die? And it is really being there. And I like to educate. And so providing some handouts if they want those. But more than anything is just to be able to normalize and to say, this is normal. This is going to be a lifelong thing. The first year is often, you get a lot of passes for all the first birthday, the first holidays, all that. Second year is often harder because people kind of figure like you're over it, which in my opinion, I despise the word closure when it comes to death, because I don't feel like there's closure. I feel like, like Nora will continue to live in your heart and no one can take that away. And so finding ways for these adults, these parents, these siblings to be able to, one, acknowledge their child or their sibling that died, but also to be able to find ways that they can embrace that reality that's awful and be able, as a family unit, to move forward. So I worked with a family whose oldest daughter was 14, died from cancer. She had 2 younger siblings. So the question I asked the middle child, which was a brother, is, where are you? How do you identify yourself now in the lineup? Are you the oldest? Are you the middle? Are you the youngest? And just, that question alone. And so we spent some time, and his younger brother was like, how do you identify? Do you say, when someone says to you, how many siblings do you have? Do you say 2? Do you say 1? How do you answer that? And so kind of prompting them and giving them some opportunities so that they don't get blindsided. The same thing with parents. How many kids do you have? It's a very normal, seemingly a situation that should not cause distress.
Yeah.
And for a parent that has had a child die, it often causes distress, because in that moment you have to think about, do I say 2? Do I say 3? Do I say 1 died? Then I have their reaction. I might cry. I mean, there's so many pieces that in that second you have to decide. And so using some of those examples to some parents can be very, very helpful. And then also just validating. And I encourage them to be in other support groups because I don't know what it's like to have a child die. I've worked with a lot of families that have, but I don't know. And so referring them to whether it's compassionate friends, we have a monthly support group here, and finding places where they can just like, oh my gosh, you felt that too, and not feel so isolated. Because it's a world for many parents and for many siblings where they feel so alone.
I've spent a lot of my time post Nora passing away that I blog on Facebook about grief and like what I'm going through and things like that. And I've really kind of built a community of people around that who I enjoy reading what I write because it's all unfiltered and it's just raw and it's really how I feel. And people are like, I thank you so much for sharing that. I don't feel so alone. So,
Yeah.
just it's encouraging to hear you say these things. And also, like, there's so many different ways you can get support or support groups through many different organizations. And that's just amazing. And I also applaud you for saying, like, someone's child died. I think a lot of times in our society, people, they don't want to say the word died or death. They have to say, oh, they passed away or they're in heaven now, which is okay. But I think it's also something that we as a society need to normalize. Like, people die and we don't have to sugarcoat that, and it hurts and it's sad and our emotions are raw from it, and it's important to do that. But
Yeah,
so,
and kids do die, and
mm,
people don't know what to say. And so
yes.
I often use the term, it's like you have grief cooties, like you were in third grade and you had cooties on the bars. It's like you have grief cooties and people see you in the store and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know. I don't know if I want to talk to Tiffany. And so they go to the other aisle
Mm,
and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I saw you in the grocery store, but they don't know what to say. And I want to educate people. It's like grief and death is a part of our everyday life. Is it pleasant? No, but let's have a conversation about it. Let's talk about what happens when a family has been totally derailed when a child dies, and also derailed when a child is diagnosed with cancer, because
mhm.
everything changes in that moment.
So, kind of what you were just talking about, when a child dies from cancer, how can the community avoid isolating them even further than they're already feeling isolated?
That's a great question, Tiffany. My first response is to embrace it. And when so I don't know your experience after Nora died. However, for a lot of families, they are just like their whole world is reeling and trying to kind of figure out how are we going to even take the next step. And then you have to plan a funeral or a celebration of life or whatever it is that you want. And then you have to think in terms of how do we even put one foot in front of the other. And so I think something that the community can do, there's a number of things. One is just be present. You don't have to say anything. You can't fix it, and people want to fix it.
Yes,
So,
they
like saying, "Hey, Tiffany, I'm making chili and I'm making tomato soup. Which would you like? Because I'm going to bring it over tomorrow." Or, let me take Ryan, your son. I don't know. I have no idea what your son's. And I'm going to the park, and let me just take him. See, he loves playing with Dylan, my friend, my son, and so we're just going to take him out. Is that okay? So offering very pragmatic things that you can do that can be helpful, that maybe for an hour, it may be a meal. You may do a meal train, you may do a fundraiser. I mean, there's a lot of different things you can do when a family has had this catastrophic experience. Um, but I think if you're going to go and be with the family, you don't have to say much. You can just say, I'm here. You might even offer to clean their house or do a laundry or go grocery shopping. Some of those tasks that are so overwhelming when all that first happens, I use the acronym SUG, sudden unexpected grief. And it's often affiliated with your senses, so things that you see, touch, taste, hear, and smell. Grocery stores are huge sug moments. I worked with a dad years ago at hospice, and his son had died. He was 13, and he died in a drowning accident. So, very sudden, unexpected death. And he was telling me this story about 6 months after his son died. He was grocery shopping, and he went to the cereal aisle and he pulled down a box of Honey Nut Cheerios, and he just started to sob because he had other children, but nobody else ate or Honey Nut Cheerios. And it was like in that moment, he was like, I will never buy another box of Honey Nut Cheerios for my son. And he said, Susan, I was so upset. I had a full cart of groceries. I ran out and just sobbed in my car. And I said, that is so understandable and normal. And I said, when I'm in the grocery store and there's some empty or there's some half full carts, I wonder if people have had sug moments, because that's such a common reaction, whether it's a child, an adult, whoever. But grocery stores are huge sug places.
That's
Wow.
an interesting observation. I've heard, I did a program called Grief Share, which is another, grief support group. And so that I had several of my friends in the group say that they had had those very things happen in the grocery store. I haven't experienced that myself just because Nora was too young and she, it wasn't really anything triggering at the grocery store. So that kind of wasn't my thing, but I could absolutely see that on children or adults who are even a little bit older than her, how that could be very triggering.
Right, right. And you see kids that would be Nora's age now. Or, and that's the other thing is then you start aging your child, or some people don't age their child, or an adult. But I mean, today we're talking about kids. So.
Well, thank you also for touching on ways to support families, like, hey, I'm bringing over chili, because I think one mistake people make a lot is, let me know if I can do anything, I'm here if you need. And honestly, that puts a lot of pressure on you as a cancer mom or somebody that's grieving to think of something to say, and it still at that point feels like you're asking for help, versus the I'm bringing the chili, or which one, tomato soup, chili. I think that that's really key to touch on. I think for any listeners who are in a supportive role or know somebody who's dealing with this, that was a great example, because I can't tell you how many times I get the, let me know how I can help, let me know if I can do anything, and I'm like, well, how am I supposed to let you know, like it's just that makes it work almost, to think of that. So
I would think to myself, like, I can't even wipe my own butt right now. Like, I cannot think about how to do anything. Like, I don't know what I need.
Exactly.
No idea.
I had one family where someone just said, I have this, I'm going to mow your lawn every week through the summer.
We had a neighbor do that.
For those parents, they were like, whoa, that was so kind. And so every Friday or Saturday, that person showed up and mowed their yard. And not only did that, but also cleaned up some of the stuff that needed, some of the other foliage and stuff that needed to be cleaned up. And they said that was such a gift. And it was a quiet gift. It was a way that, they didn't have to ask every week, oh, can you come mow the yard? It's just like, no, I have you for the summer. I have your yard mowed. And so just some very practical things like that can speak volumes, whether it's to you, Kelly, or to you, Tiffany, in your different journeys that you guys are dealing with.
Absolutely. All right, let's pivot a little to siblings and families. You've already touched on siblings quite a bit, and I love that you focus on siblings too, because I do think that sometimes they get a little left behind in this. But what are some ways that parents can support siblings who may feel like they're being overlooked, or they're just confused or scared during their brother or sister's treatment?
I think one of the main things is keeping the communication open. I've had some families, not many, but some families where they actually, and it may have to be at the hospital because their sibling is at the hospital, where they do like a family meeting. and they just kind of chat and kind of check in with everybody. um, I do trying to keep as much of the normal structure of life going, can be very helpful for siblings. I really encourage parents that have a child that is in treatment a lot and in and out of the hospital to set up like little dates with the other siblings. And it may not be like 5 hours, it may be an hour, but finding some moments where I have time for you right now, and being able to acknowledge that. And that can be a stretch for some parents, especially when they're so exhausted and they've been up because they're dealing with so many different aspects of that. I think another piece is being able to use correct terminology. And we talked you talked, Tiffany, just about using the word death, but with the whole treatment, like your brother or your sister, and depending on age, they have what's called cancer. It's not contagious. You didn't cause it. And so just reassuring the other siblings, because sometimes they get really scared. So working with this one family where the daughter, the younger of their two kids, had brain cancer. Her son was going into kindergarten. And what she said is that they kept using the word that she was sick.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't use cancer. So he went to kindergarten, and people and kids started getting sick. And I said to her, I said, I'm really concerned about how he's going to interpret that. And I said, I really want to encourage you to use a word that your sister has what's called cancer. And so educating the mom, and because I work with the mom, not the dad, educating the mom on that, and realizing that once mom and dad were able to sit down with the kindergartner and be able to say, your sister has what's called cancer, you didn't cause it, it's not contagious, but this is why, she's in the hospital a lot, was like a game changer for this little kid. Because then it was in his mind, because you have to think, the different ages, in his mind, sick, you end up in the hospital and your mom or your dad goes away for months or weeks or a long time. So being able to support that. But it's hard when you have a sick kid in the hospital and you have other children that also need you. And that is a hard road to navigate. And so for the parents, doing a lot of giving yourself grace and being mindful of your expectations for yourself. You're not going to do this perfectly, and you're going to fail at it. And that is just reality, and that's okay. And that doesn't make you a bad parent. It just means you're exhausted and you're trying your best. Finding, if there's like a support family member or someone outside of the immediate family that this kid can go talk to or do things with, can also be helpful. Some people will do like a special, like a little gift bag for the kid. So one of my clients, his sister was also having like radiation for 6 weeks. And every day she would get something out of the prize basket. Well, he was getting very jealous of that. And so I said to mom, I said, why not? Let's just find some little doodad things for him. And every day he can get something out of his prize basket. So, because then it becomes competition. And it's like, why does she get that and I don't? And that can be very stressful for parents as well. And so just kind of brainstorming what would be easy to do. And so finding ways to make whatever easy to do happen. Giving parents permission, um, just for them to know, I am not going to do this perfectly. It is a brand new world. I'm not a parent that's had that happen, but for both you, Kelly, and you, Tiffany, of this brand new world that you had no roadmap for, that you had to figure out which way you were going to go each day. every moment with decision making. And also recognizing that you're exhausted. You're not only exhausted physically, but emotionally, having to deal with all the different testing and diagnosis and things like that, and giving yourself a lot of grace in this process.
Absolutely. Well said.
I love it. I love it. So, we talked a little bit about, what the emotional status of brother or sister might be like, but are there any red flags or subtle behaviors that might indicate that the child going through the process going to need therapeutic support, even if they might seem okay to the outside?
I think one of the big ones is mood regulation, behavior changes, finding ways like if all of a sudden they start isolating, and a lot of it is age. You may see more of that. I'm not going to say necessarily with teenagers, but teenagers tend to do some that a little bit more. And so those would be some of the red flags that I would put out there immediately is behavior changes, isolation, and moods that are all the way up and down. They may not be amenable to going and talking to somebody, and so maybe you become creative and you find a adult or that you trust that they can just come pick them up and spend some time with them. It may be a youth pastor at your church. It may be a family member that they love to spend time with and feel special with. It may be a dad, or it may be a mom that you just, you guys pivot and okay, I'll stay at the hospital and you take so and so out, and finding that. And if you find that they are in a place where they are not, school is another thing. If they were B or A students and all of a sudden their grades they're not turning in assignments, they're not doing well in school, that's another big target. Are they being bullied at school? Are they bullying at school because they need some sense of control? Because again, this world that the families get thrown into, control goes out the window. I mean, there's a lot of no control because things keep changing. It's an ever changing world when you have a kid that is diagnosed with a cancer. And so looking at that with schools and stuff like that and checking in, making sure if you're a parent that you check in with the school, let them know this is what's going on. And so if David is having a really hard time, can you please give him some grace because his sister is in the hospital and it's really been a rough road for him and for us.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think those red flags can come in many ways, shapes, and forms too. Riley's older sister, Bailey, was only 2.5 when Riley was diagnosed. And she was potty training, but decided she was going to hold it because it was one of the few things in her life that she had control over. We
Yes.
uprooted her, moved halfway across the country. So we started seeing her doing these funny little rocking motions. And of course, my mind was spinning because I already had one child that I was dealing with that was sick. And I said, what's going on with this one? And that's not something I would ever thought would be a form of grief or, distress. And also, you don't think of a 2.5-year-old even really fully understanding what's going on. But I think kids, no matter what age, understand a lot more than we give them credit for. So
100%. I worked
thank
with
you
a
for touching
mom,
on
and
this.
her 9-year-old had a cardiac event at home and went to the hospital, was on life support, and she had a 5-year-old at home. And she started wetting the bed. And then she went to school. Her sister died. She started wetting the bed, which was a kind of a normal reaction. She didn't have a lot of words for her grief, um, but then went to school and started having accidents at school. And so mom put together what she called the oops bag, and that just went to school every day. And probably 3 or 4 times a week, she was having accidents. So this was probably a year after her sister died. And I said, I really think you need to see a urologist. Just let's rule out that there's not something organic going on with her. And
Right.
sure enough, they did whatever testing they needed to do. And the doctor said, this is great. This is how she is having control over whatever all these weird feelings of going from the youngest to an only child because her
Mhm.
sister died. And so just being mindful of that kids, that's how kids try to regulate and get some control, like your daughter.
Absolutely.
I
Now,
And
I
agree.
think
they'll start doing stuff like, I had a family where kids started shoplifting. They were like
Oh
ooh,
gosh.
10 or 11. And they're like, oh my God, he knows better than that. But it was like he needed attention. And so, what better way? And, anyways, the people that he shoplifted from were very gracious and didn't press charges. But that was that was a very hard thing for that family.
yes,
Ironically, Zane has done the same thing with bedwetting and having accidents, and we're 3.5 years into it now, and we're still on the struggle bus with it sometimes.
Yeah, and
yeah,
it is probably more of a reality than not for
Yeah.
kids, or thumb sucking, or temper tantrums, or regressive behaviors is so normal because
Mhm.
they don't have control over the situation.
absolutely. Now, as a cancer mom whose child did survive and we're out of treatment, a lot of times I hear people say, "Oh, that's so great. You're done. Things, I'm so glad things are better." But you and I and Tiffany and those of us who have been through this know that once treatment ends, sometimes the emotional challenges, that's when they really begin. So why is survivorship sometimes the hardest part emotionally for families and children?
Probably one of the main reasons that people do not recognize that exactly with what you just said. It's like, oh yay, she doesn't have cancer anymore. And it's like, that's true. But we have this is a lifelong thing, for her as well as for us as parents, as a family. And so, you have the fears of scans. You have, and is your daughter still getting scans?
Yes.
How often is she getting them now?
We just switched to a year. So we did
Okay.
3 months for a long time, six
Yeah.
months for a long time. She just switched to 1 year.
Yeah. And even switching from 6 months to a year is scary because it's like,
Hmm.
what if? What if it comes back? And how will I know that? And I mean, it's this underlying anxiety that you will live with the rest of
Hmm.
your life,
Yep.
as will she, as will whoever else is in your household. And so, survivorship is so misunderstood because people, again, are not educated on what this whole process is. And so they do want to celebrate. And there's a part of you that wants to celebrate that. But then the other part of it is, yes, but this may have caused cognitive delays or learning disabilities, or what is this going to do to their reproductive world? As a little girl or as a little boy, um, are they going to be able to have children when they become adults if they want to do that? Um, all of that is things that people don't think of. They don't even recognize that, oh, it's great now that she's out of treatment. You should all be so happy, but you're not out of treatment. You're still getting scans once a year and blood work, and your brain is on hyper alert for anything that happens that is irregular in her behavior or a symptom. Plus, with your other child, probably the same thing. Like you said, oh, I can't believe it. She could be having cancer as well. And so, and I would assume for you, same Tiffany, for your son,
Yeah.
it's like you're on hyper alert, like watching when's the other shoe going to fall. And so,
Always.
I'm sorry, what?
Is it always?
Yeah.
Always.
And so having that survivorship is great. And it's also so misunderstood. And so, again, normalizing that with parents, validating, yes, this is exciting and scary at the same time, and you're holding both. And sometimes you don't do a really good job of either one. And that is okay. You're human and you're trying to figure out this journey that you're on that you never, ever, ever wanted to be on.
I
And
think
yet
you
you're stuck.
put that so eloquently. I love that. And yeah, I mean, you work with some really heavy cases and patient loads and things like that. So, what gives you hope in your work with these families?
I love what I do. And it is a sacred journey to walk with individuals, families, groups, in a world that a lot of people don't know how to talk about it. And I am very comfortable talking about cancer. I'm very comfortable talking about death. I'm very comfortable talking about sickness. And I feel very honored to be a part of whatever part of journey I am with the people I work with. It is definitely a calling. It's a passion, um, and not everybody can do that. So I feel
Agree.
very,
Well,
um,
it shows. I was going to say it definitely shows that you love what you do. And I know Tiffany and I have a lot of appreciation for people like you because that's not an easy job. And it's not things that a lot of people want to talk about and connect with families about because it's very hard and it's very, very sad a lot of times. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. So, how can listeners support the Austin Hatcher Foundation and help promote mental health for pediatric cancer patients and their loved ones?
so we do provide services around the country as far as mental health services. I'm licensed in California, so I can do telehealth with people in California because
Okay.
we're based in Tennessee. And then Tennessee and Georgia are the three states that we have licensed counselors with, where we can work with people. But if people are interested, we also have some other programs we have that they may be interested in as well. And they can go ahead and just, it's, sorry, I got to look it up, but it's
No, that's okay. We'll make sure we include the links.
www.hatcherfoundation.org.
Okay.
And so that's how they could find our services and see if there's anything in there that they would like more information of or to support. And like the two of you have nonprofits, this is a nonprofit, and would be grateful for passing this on to anybody that this might be helpful for.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I didn't mean to cut you off, but we'll most definitely will include the website and how to reach out to you in our show notes. So for anybody listening that wants to look into the Austin Hatcher Foundation, we'll make sure we have that.
That's great. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Susan. I think that your knowledge in all of these things has been invaluable for our listeners to hear, especially in the grief and death and dying aspect. I think that it's so important to talk about some of that, talk about family dynamics and coping and survivorship and things like that. So we're so thankful that you joined us today. If you want to learn more about the Austin Hatcher Foundation, we're going to link that in the show notes, or you can visit goldribbon-kids.org or nationalpcf.org to learn more. And if you want to contact us, our contacts will be in there as well. See you guys next time.
Thank you.